Rachel sighed sadly and wiped the window once again, as it didn't seem clean enough to her. Despite the fact that the woman was trying to get herself into a working mood, her heart was dreary and sad. And only the voice of her 6-year-old daughter, Mary, sounded just as pleasing as before. The little girl with perky pigtails and a serious expression on her face dressed the dolls in the new clothes which her mother helped her make. Of course, playing house with her mother, Mary didn't know that just 6 months ago, her father did something very bad. Rachel deliberately didn't tell her daughter about it, inventing some story about her dad having gone on a long business trip. But the reality, unfortunately, was very different. Rachel met her future husband during her senior year at the university. The handsome quarterback immediately won the heart of the naive young woman who grew up in a simple working family. Despite the fact that most of Rachel's acquaintances were against her relationship with Trevor, the young woman still succumbed to the charms of the young womanizer. However, young love and all the worrying it entailed didn't prevent Rachel from graduating from the university and getting a degree in economics. By the will of fate, the young woman didn't get to test out her education at work because it was then that she found out that she was pregnant. Trevor took this news with due calmness and, like any decent man, suggested that they should get married. It was hard to say whether the man's desire to tie the knot was sincere or if his decision was based solely on the circumstances. At that moment, Rachel didn't think about it and happily accepted Trevor's proposal. A month later, the young people held a modest wedding and started living together. At first, Trevor seemed to be the most caring and loving husband, but after the birth of their daughter, Mary, his enthusiasm gradually faded. Trying to justify her husband in her own eyes, Rachel attributed his behavior to fatigue and work-related stress. Time passed, Mary was growing up, but Trevor was still neglecting his family and burying himself in his work. It was at this turning point that Rachel ran into her old high school friend at the supermarket. Amanda gave her an appraising look and said, "You look great, friend. So pretty. And I see you already have a ring on your finger. You didn't waste any time, did you?" Her friend's words instantly made Rachel blush. "Come on, what do I have to be proud of? I'm just like everyone else. A husband and a little daughter," answered the young mother. But as it turned out a little later, Amanda's life wasn't like everyone else's. To Rachel's great surprise, her friend had already been married and got divorced. However, Amanda didn't look depressed or even the least bit sad about it. Her eyes still had their spark, and her face was still sporting her ever-present light smile, which seemed to be mocking the entire world. That day, Amanda was very persistent and even invited herself over to Rachel's house. Playing with little Mary, the woman stayed at Rachel's house until her husband's friend returned home from work. Of course, being a true womanizer, Trevor couldn't help but notice Amanda's good looks and even allowed himself to voice some exquisite compliments. Rachel was still in the kitchen at the moment, so she didn't see them meet for the first time. Despite the fact that the young mother's childhood wasn't easy, she still learned to trust people and to only see the good in them. Thus, she didn't see anything bad in Trevor and Amanda hanging out together. 3 years flew by quickly. Rachel went back to work, and Amanda became a frequent guest in Rachel's home. Meanwhile, Trevor's business was facing one setback after another. The fact was that he got his economics degree mainly thanks to his involvement in football, while his knowledge of the subject remained at a very basic level. "Don't worry, dear, things will definitely work out. Just don't give up," Rachel said. But calming Trevor down was very hard. That was because the man had long had the idea in his head that Rachel was somehow responsible for all of his failures. "After all, it was Rachel who tied me down with marriage. I definitely wasn't ready to have a family at such an early age," Trevor told himself, twisting the situation. But in fact, the young man's failures didn't have anything to do with his wife or a biased attitude from the management. It was all because of simple laziness, which took over Trevor as soon as he stepped into his office. But things were very different for Rachel. Staying late at work, the young mother was very successful in all the areas assigned to her by the company leadership. That, of course, had an effect on Rachel's salary, which increased quickly. Over time, Rachel's contribution to the family budget became several times higher than her husband's modest income. However, the respectful wife never mentioned it, in order not to upset Trevor yet again. As Rachel climbed the corporate ladder, her workload became more and more extensive every day. She often had to attend various seminars and forums, which were organized by the company management for their employees. One day, as she was getting ready to go on yet another business trip, Rachel suddenly noticed that Trevor was secretly texting someone. It looked very strange. It didn't seem that he was talking to someone about work or simply surfing the vast expanses of the internet. Choosing not to aggravate the already strained relationship, Rachel hugged her husband goodbye and, having kissed Mary on the cheek, went to the airport. By a strange coincidence, the forum that Rachel's company organized was a closed one and finished in record time. Rachel's joy knew no bounds. Wow, this means that I won't just be able to come home early, but I can even wander around the local shops, Rachel thought with a smile. Rachel actually wanted to find a gift for her friend Amanda, who had long dreamed of a cocktail dress. Having spent almost half of her salary on the purchase, Rachel went home. Since the woman wanted to give the gift to her friend in person, the first thing she did was go to her place. Then Rachel planned to go home and surprise her unsuspecting husband with a bottle of red wine and some dessert. Unfortunately, as Rachel pressed the doorbell button, she had no way of knowing what would happen next. Imagine the woman's surprise when it was her husband who opened the door for her. He was stretching out sleepily and wearing a robe. "Trevor, what are you doing here? And why are you dressed like that?" she asked, stammering at every word. "I'll explain it all later. This isn't what it looks like." Trevor tried to explain himself, but it was all too obvious for Rachel already. And all of her remaining doubts were dispelled when Amanda stepped into the living room wearing a very revealing nightgown. "Oh, hello, girlfriend. Please don't worry. Trevor came over to fix the leaking faucet in the kitchen," Amanda said, hiding a smile in the corner of her lips. "I see that he repaired everything just fine. Otherwise, you wouldn't be standing here in your underwear," Rachel said with undisguised irony and threw a beautifully wrapped package with the dress for her friend. Not believing a single word said by the unlucky lovers, Rachel slammed the door loudly in parting and disappeared into the swift flow of people on Main Street. Tears were flowing down the face of the unfortunate woman, but they didn't bring her any relief, but only seemed to make her even sadder. Rachel picked Mary up from daycare on her way home, and having put on a mask of happiness and tranquility, told her daughter that her dad went on a long business trip to one of the countries of Western Europe. To Rachel's apparent relief, the unsuspecting Mary gladly believed the lies her mother had come up with. The single mother had to go through a lot before she found the strength to start a new life. And now, a year after the breakup, Rachel felt finally free. During all this time, she saw her ex-husband only once. It happened 6 months ago, when after a series of unsuccessful deals, Trevor got fired from his job. Of course, Amanda wasn't planning on giving money to her unemployed ex-husband, who also seemed to have developed a drinking problem. "You know what, Trevor? Go back to your wife. I thought you were a real man, but it looks like you still need someone to babysit you," Amanda announced in a tone that brooked no objections. That same day, Trevor found himself on the street with the small travel bag that fit all his belongings. It was then that the man decided to go back to his ex-wife and ask for her forgiveness. But when Trevor came to Rachel's house, her reaction was very violent and uncompromising. "How dare you come back here? You did nothing to win my trust back, or your daughter's trust for that matter. And now, when you're out on the street, you remembered that you even have a daughter. Goodbye, Trevor. I have nothing else to say to you," Rachel exclaimed, having a hard time holding back her tears as she slammed the door right in front of her stunned husband. Realizing that it was definitely over, Trevor adjusted the bag on his shoulder and headed to the nearest bus stop. Only after losing his family did the man realize that he was the only one responsible for all of his problems. While Rachel smiled at her reflection in the mirror and went to her daughter's room to help Mary try on a new batch of clothes they made for her dolls. Now, the young mother was confident that she'd made the right decision regarding her ex-husband, whom she no longer had any feeling for.